Thank you. I just want to start by saying what a delight it is to be here today as part of this celebration and to be a participant in the Block Center. I want to talk about AI, where it's headed and the kinds of impacts it can have and what we might be able to do about it. I didn't bring a clicker, so it's going to be harder to give my talk. Thank you. Technology. So if we want to talk about AI, I think the very best way to begin is to think about the ways in which really we've seen very dramatic progress in AI over the past 10 years. It's hard to recall because we get so used to the technology. But if you think back to the year 2007 when the iPhone came out, do you remember that? You could not talk to the iPhone. It's hard to believe since we talk to our devices all the time now. You could not talk to your iPhone because computers were deaf. Computers did not, speech recognition did not work. But today, a little bit over 10 years later, computer technology for speech recognition has reached roughly the level of humans in transcribing spoken speech to the equivalent written form. And here's the plot showing the advance in speech recognition accuracy over the years. Similarly, 10 years ago, computers were not only deaf, they were blind. You could show them a photograph and they were unable to accurately recognize the items in that photograph. But again, here 10 years later, we have computers that can identify thousands of objects in standard photographs, again now with accuracies that rival human level. In the area of robotics, we see similar progress. 10 years ago, we didn't have, on the streets of Pittsburgh, autonomous vehicles driving around very frequently. We had a few PhD theses in the early 90s. But now it's a routine thing, and it's not even just Uber, it's several companies here in Pittsburgh. Beyond self-driving cars, we see the advent of robotics in medical, surgery, and many other arenas. So you might ask yourself, well, let me point out one other area. In the area of game playing, computers have famously beat the best human at Go, at chess, more recently thanks to Thomas Sandholm's work here at poker. And you might think, well, it's kind of a frivolity to think about AI and game playing. But it's not. It turns out that the fact that AI can beat us all in these kind of games is a symptom of a very different kind of intelligence than is required for perception, for hearing, or for seeing. Because to win at a game, you have to think analytically about look-ahead search, probabilistic outcomes. What if I draw a queen? And you have to do a very different kind of reasoning. So across several different, very disparate areas, we've seen dramatic advances in artificial intelligence. And the reason we've seen those, I have to say, is because there's been an underlying paradigm shift in the way in which artificial intelligence is being driven. We've changed from the days when people tried to manually write programs to do these kinds of things, to instead where dominantly people are training using machine learning programs to do these. So that's kind of where the technology is. I just wanted to kind of refresh our minds because we forget often how quickly this is advancing. Over the coming 10 years, I think we'll see even more rapid advances. So what are the impacts of this and what can we do about it? I had the good fortune of co-chairing recently a National Academy study on information technology and the US workforce. And in that study, we looked at and considered a variety of types of impacts. And the main conclusion of the study is that this is a complex situation and there are many different types of impact that information technology is exerting on the workforce. And I want to list those here. The first and most obvious one is on jobs, of course. For example, there are jobs that are going to be eliminated by technology. There's no doubt about it. If you are a toll booth operator, your job will be eliminated in the coming decade. It's easier and more efficient to do that with technology, and it's already happening. It will happen more. But there are other kinds of jobs, and as we looked more and more into this in the National Academy study and in some follow-up research I've been doing in collaboration with Eric Brynjolfsson, an economist at MIT, we found that, in fact, it looks to us like most jobs will not be eliminated, but most jobs will be impacted. And here's kind of the quick explanation of why. Think about the job of a doctor. Will the doctor's job be eliminated by technology? I think the answer is no, but it'll be dramatically changed. So the way to think about this is, if you're a doctor, unlike toll booth operator, your job involves many tasks. You have to diagnose the patient. You have to come up with candidate therapies. You have to discuss with that patient which of those therapies they really elect to proceed with. And you have to bill the patient. So those are some of the tasks involved. And when you think about automation, the right way to think about it is it applies not to the whole job at once, but to those individual tasks. So we did a study using the Bureau of Labor Statistics taxonomy of jobs and the affiliated tasks. And what our study indicated was that, in fact, most jobs, like the doctor, involve multiple tasks. Most of those jobs will have at least some tasks influenced, augmented, or perhaps automated by technology. But most jobs will not be eliminated because there will remain other tasks that are not going to be amenable to automation in the near term. So for example, a doctor, I think that job's not going away, but in the future we could expect that doctors will receive more aid from computers for diagnosis and therapy generation, probably not more aid from computers for having the heart-to-heart chat with the patient about what to do. And so that's kind of the good and the bad news for us. I think many jobs will be impacted. In fact, our studies show that the majority of jobs will be. But in fact, rather than being eliminated, they'll be redefined by redistributing those tasks. So that's one kind of impact. Second kind of impact is on education, both the supply and the demand for education. One way to think about that is in terms of when, what, and how we teach. So today at Carnegie Mellon, we typically teach undergraduates for 4 years and send them on their way. But in a world where there's more dynamism in the ebb and flow of different types of jobs, clearly we're going to want more and more continuing education. So that's the when part. The what part, what do we want to educate people to do? What do we want to teach? And here, again, it looks like maybe we need to do a little less teaching of rote memorization of facts, but we might need to do a little bit more teaching of the emotional intelligence associated skills. Skills for forming teams dynamically, for collaborating in those teams with people who know things you don't and vice versa, and assembling dynamic teams to solve the problem at hand. So that's the when and the what. The how is also going to be impacted. Already you can see on the internet a huge explosion over the last decade in online educational materials. But it's going to go beyond that. It won't be just in the distribution of education materials. It'll be in the actual content. And my colleague Lee is going to talk a little bit more later on specifically how AI might enter into computer tutoring systems to change even the how of how teaching is done. A third area for impact is business models. As Keith mentioned in his remarks a moment ago, technology is just introducing whole new ways of doing business. One of the most obvious here is the gig economy, Uber, Lyft. But not just at that level of skill. There are other gig economy jobs. For example, Upwork is a gig economy company that matches up freelance programmers, computer programmers, to available computer programming jobs. And this is, I think, a wonderful development, a key development for the future of the workforce, for two reasons. One, it brings into the workforce people who might not be able, for personal reasons, to work 40 hours a week. They can work when they want, where they want. The second reason is that this is so important to us, is that it provides an alternative to people who lose their job. Instead of going on the unemployment lines, they have an alternative option of working in the gig economy while they look for a new position. In fact, I read in the news that during the recent government shutdown, there were government employees who took advantage of Uber and Lyft, became drivers part-time during that shutdown. So that could be an important part of providing alternative employment opportunities. Yet another impact is, unfortunately, on the wealth gap. As we all know, there's a very strong skew in the distribution of income and wealth in the United States. Sadly, it looks like technology is exacerbating that. One way to think about that is that many of the technology companies that are software companies, for example, can produce more wealth with fewer people. Why? Compare that with, say, Ford Motor Company, which produces automobiles. There, the marginal cost, if you're going to produce one more automobile and sell that, you have to have employees to make the next copy of an automobile. You have to hire other people to transport that automobile to the point of sale. You have to have repair shops out there that keep it running. If instead you're producing a piece of software, the marginal cost for the next copy of software is approximately zero. You hit the copy button. The marginal cost for transporting that around the world, copies of that and selling it, is approximately zero. You put it on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, and tomorrow morning everybody in the world can access it. So that's another impact. So what can we do about this? Well, the good news is there are several things we can do. There are several things the government can do, and there are several things that we, not in the government, can do. For example, the government can adopt policies to foster a stronger gig economy so that people who are temporarily unemployed have an opportunity to still have a job while they're rebounding. What does it mean to foster a gig economy? Well, one key component of that is to remove the disincentives for employees, for people to join that gig economy. Currently, people who work in the gig economy don't have the same benefits that we have if we work 40-hour weeks. They don't have health care benefits. They don't have vacation. They don't have retirement plans. Government policies can change that. A second thing the government can do is incentivize continuing education. I just learned this week, in fact, that in Denmark, when you work, you accrue not only vacation days, but you also accrue continuing education credits that you can use to upskill yourself. And furthermore, if you change jobs, you keep those continuing education credits. They travel with you. So there are policy options there. A third area, public-private data partnerships. The sad news is we are flying blind into the jobs revolution. We don't really have the data we need to track what's really going on in the economy. The Bureau of Labor Statistics cannot answer very fundamental questions like, what technology had the most impact on the workforce last year? We don't know the answer to that. And yet, if you think about it, you think about the data that's actually online, beyond the government, in places like Indeed.com, job sites on the web, in places like LinkedIn.com, resume sites on the web, then you see that those data sets actually could provide us a real-time, updated every day, accurate estimate of skill supply and demand and job supply and demand in the workforce. The Bureau of Labor Statistics could decide to set up a new kind of public-private data partnerships to give us all, to give the government, but then to disseminate to all of us information about what's really going on. In fact, the OECD in Europe does the best job I've seen so far. They collect from every country in Europe information about job supply and demand there, and then they expose that on a beautiful website that I encourage you to take a look at. And if you look at that website, you can see, for example, that in Romania there's a surplus of mathematically trained individuals, and yet in the Netherlands there's a shortage. Interesting information to know if you happen to be unemployed in Romania. So these are things that there are many things the government can do. We can also do things as technologists. Amelia is going to speak about this more in a moment, but let me just give you one example. Think about what it means to become, to be given a teammate in your job. And think about what that means in the case that your teammate is a computer instead of a person. If your teammate is a computer, like my doctor was railing at me recently because he has to have a computer as a teammate. If your teammate is a computer, the computer comes with a fixed interface, a fixed set of functionality. And you, the human, are the one who is expected to customize and accommodate to the computer. So you, the human, are the one who's expected to be the teammate who adjusts to the other. What if we work on technology that allows the human teammate to instruct the computer about how it can help the person? I'll just mention one example. We have a project going on here at CMU where we're all teammates with our phones, our mobile phones. So we have a project going on to look at the question of how can we build phone interfaces so that the human can teach the phone new capabilities. And in our prototype system, you can say to our phone, any time that it snows at night, wake me up 30 minutes earlier. And the phone responds by saying, I don't understand. Do you want to teach me? And then you can say yes. You can say, if you want to know if it's snowing, open up this weather app, and where it says current conditions, if that says SNOW, it's snowing. If you want to wake me up 30 minutes earlier, open up this alarm app, subtract 30 from that number right there. And after you instruct it by showing and telling, it is capable then, you've programmed it. You've programmed it not in a programming language, but in your language. And it's just a prototype at this point, but if you think about that, you get the idea of we're not helpless in this evolution. There are things we can do both at the government level and at the technology development level to change the ways in which people are going to live and have the glass half full, half of the story in technology. So to summarize, the bottom line is that information technology has many impacts on the workforce. The good news is there are things we can do about it both at the government policy level, but also at the technology development level. And the Block Center, I'd say, is just a great forum, a great substrate for. Thank you.